A virtual machine can be in one of five states. If you shut down a virtual machine, it moves to an off state. Any VM you look at in the Hyper-V console, you'll actually see the state column and it'll tell you the state of the virtual machine. So it can be just simply powered off like you did a shutdown. When you start a virtual machine, depending on what applications the virtual machines actually run, it may take a few seconds, maybe slightly longer, for the virtual machine to power fully up. As it's starting, your state here will just say it's actually starting. As soon as it starts up, completes all those startup processes, it moves to a running state. So normally, when you look in the Hyper-V Manager, all your VMs are going to be in a running state mostly. An interesting one is the ability to pause a virtual machine. Not often do you put a virtual machine in a pause state, but when you do this, it actually releases the CPU. So all CPU processes cease. But what it does, everything in memory is retained in memory. So let's say you're maybe maxed out on processing power, you're running some big task on one virtual machine. You have another virtual machine that you just want it to stop working for just a while. Instead of shutting it completely down, having it move to an off state, you could pause it, it'll release CPU power, but everything is retained in memory. When you're ready to, you can simply unpause it, it consumes the CPU processing power again, and everything in memory is simply reloaded, and it's like you never went to a paused state. Now, I don't think I've ever paused a virtual machine for that reason. Normally, every time I've seen a paused virtual machine, it's been because we've had a server level problem. Actually, every time I've seen it, it's because of poor planning, not my planning, but someone else's, on the server side, and the server has ran out of storage. When you get to a point your hard drive is completely full, your virtual machines will all start moving to a paused state. If they all say paused, that is the one telltale sign that somehow you ran out of hard disk space and didn't realize it. Hard to believe you wouldn't realize it, but sometimes that happens. Now, very common is saved. As you can see, my VMs here are both in a save state. What save does is take everything that's in memory right now, and it actually saves it to a differencing disk we talked about earlier. Like it saves it to another virtual hard drive, and then it powers the machine off. So let's say in your VM, you had Microsoft Word open. You had maybe you had the browser open and a couple other applications. You then click and save the virtual machine. Well, when you go back and start the virtual machine, it loads from that save state. So the same Word document will be open. Your browser would be open. Your applications would simply go back to a running state. Very similar to Hibernate, if you've ever used that on like a client OS in the past. I use save because it's much faster. If I'm just going to stop my virtual machines for a moment, instead of trying to turn them off and shut them down and then start them back up, much quicker just to go to a save state. And also in Hyper-V, when you shut down the host, the virtual machines automatically move to a saved state anytime you shut down the host. So if all my VMs here are running and I want to reboot the host, never do I have a need to come here and right-click the virtual machines and try to save or anything like that. You just reboot the host. They all move to a save state. When the host powers back up, they all go back to a running state. In Hyper-V, we also have something called a checkpoint, formerly a snapshot. In Server 2008 through 2012, Microsoft called it a snapshot. In Server 2012 R2, they started calling it a checkpoint. So just a simple name change. If you've heard that term snapshot, it's a checkpoint now. But what a checkpoint actually is, it allows you to take, we'll use that term, a snapshot of a virtual machine at a specific point in time. What that means, let's say you have your VM running. You are going to install, your plan is to install a bunch of updates, some applications, and you're going to reconfigure some settings. But just in case anything goes wrong, you want the ability to revert. So what I would do is take a checkpoint right now. Let's say you do this at 11 a.m. You take your checkpoint. Then at 11:30 a.m., you do all three of these things. You let all your updates, your apps, your settings, all is done. You reboot. If everything's working great, you just keep going. But let's say your app, it has a problem. Or maybe it's not the app you actually want. So instead of uninstalling the application, you could simply go and revert back to this checkpoint. So you would revert back to exactly the configuration you had at 11 a.m. Updates would be gone. Your applications would be gone. Any settings you change, they would just be back to exactly the way they were when the checkpoint was created. So truly a way to revert back in time for the entire VM configuration. I'll tell you something I do in my test lab environment. In my test lab, I will build normally a virtual machine that's a domain controller, and I'll build a VM that's just a member server. So, they'll both run 2019. But as soon as I create these and install Active Directory, I'll join my member server to the domain. I'll then take a checkpoint. Then I'll start creating policies, installing other applications, all those things. So you kind of go through and you almost run so many configurations, you almost trash this environment. Well, let's say you're done with a certain test, and tomorrow you want to just test something completely different. Well, instead of trying to rebuild the virtual environment or uninstall all the applications you loaded, you could simply revert back to the checkpoint that you took as soon as you install these operating systems and configure your little domain environment, and you're just immediately back to that moment in time. So very useful for many different reasons. Now, we do have two types of checkpoints. There is a production checkpoint and a standard checkpoint. When you go to configure this, you simply go to the settings of a virtual machine, and under management, there is this checkpoints option. And this tells us exactly what the difference is. A production checkpoint uses backup technology in the guest operating system to create data-consistent checkpoints that don't include information about running applications. No information about apps running. So it does not actually save the current state of the operating system. The standard checkpoint create application-consistent checkpoints that do capture the current state of applications. So an easy way to think of that, a standard checkpoint captures everything running in memory. So your applications that are open, you revert back to that checkpoint, they will still be open. If you take a production checkpoint, you won't have those applications be open. Does not have anything about the current system state as far as open apps, anything like that. Now, the reason production checkpoints was created, there were some things that could have been running or updating when you took your standard checkpoint, and then when you try to revert back to that checkpoint, for whatever reason, it errors out. Say you were saving a file at the same time you took your checkpoint. When you revert back, it would literally be in the act of saving that file. If something is updating a system file or anything like that, it would revert back to that exact second in time and try to resume those processes. So for that reason, once in a while, my experience was extremely rare, you would go to revert back to a checkpoint and it just tells you it can't. It failed. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. It does not work. You had no idea that this was going to fail. It took the checkpoint. You thought everything was okay until you tried to revert to it. So production checkpoints themselves are actually, Microsoft says, more stable than standard checkpoints. A quick way to know which one you're using, well, naturally you could come here and just see if it is production or standard. But if you take a checkpoint of a virtual machine and then you revert back to that checkpoint, if it's a standard checkpoint, let's say your VM's running and you revert back to the checkpoint, then your VM will keep running. You revert to the checkpoint, it'll still be in a running state. If you have a production checkpoint and you revert to it, even if your VM is powered on when you revert to the checkpoint, it will always be in an off state because it had no data related to anything that was resident in memory, so you'd simply have to just power it on again. And that's easy enough to do, just one subtle difference you notice in the interface. There is a maximum of 50 checkpoints per virtual machine allowed. That is mainly for space consumption, but all you do is delete older ones. You can also control the location. By default, it goes to the C program data, Microsoft Windows Hyper-V. Now, many people are unaware that there is a C program data because that's a hidden folder, but it's on every computer, client OSs, server OSs, but that's where it lives. So if I just go to my run box and I just type C:/ program data, when that opens up, I have this Microsoft folder, and under that there's a Windows folder, and inside of that Windows folder is the Hyper-V folder. Now that's the location for my checkpoints. Now even here it'll list them as snapshots, but they're actually checkpoints, is what they'll be referred to in the interface. Now we see that path is C:/ program data, but if you just click on the C drive itself, you'll never see a folder named program data because it is a hidden folder and it's one of the protected operating system file locations. So whenever you want to connect to that for whatever reason, just to look at it, just type C:/ program data and you can connect right into it.